Imagine a single river, one lifeline, sustaining the lives of nearly 300 million people across 11 nations. A river that carved civilizations into the desert, that fed pharaohs and fueled empires. And now, that same river sits at the center of a geopolitical storm that could define the future of Africa. This is the Nile. The world's longest river has always been more than just water. For thousands of years, it's been history, power, and survival. But today, it's also becoming a battleground. Not for armies, but for access, energy, and control. At the heart of this modern water war are two countries, Egypt, downstream and dependent, and Ethiopia, upstream and rising. Egypt has long claimed the Nile as its birthright. Without it, the country is a sliver of green trapped in the ocean of desert. Over 90% of Egypt's freshwater comes from the Nile. Its fields, cities, and industries grow along its banks. The river isn't just important, it's existential. But most of the water doesn't actually begin in Egypt. Roughly 60% of the Nile's flow comes from the Ethiopian highlands, specifically the Blue Nile, which joins the other Nile tributary, the White Nile, at Sudan's capital, Khartoum. And in 2011, Ethiopia made a decision that would reshape the region. It began building a massive hydroelectric project, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD. To Ethiopia, the GIRD is a symbol of national pride, a chance to bring electricity to millions, stabilize the economy, and export power to neighbors. It's the largest infrastructure in modern Ethiopian history. But to Egypt, it's a threat. A dam upstream means control upstream, and control over water in a region defined by scarcity can mean leverage, inequality, and even war. So how did we get here? Why is the dam such a big deal? And can water, the source of life, become the cause of conflict? Let's dive into the geopolitics of the Nile. The Nile has two main tributaries with very different behavior. The White Nile from the Great Lakes region of Africa provides relatively steady base flow year-round. The Blue Nile from Ethiopia and Atbara rivers delivered the dramatic summer flood from June to September, along with most of the sediment. In flood months, those Ethiopian tributaries account for the overwhelming share of the main Nile's flow. Across the full year, the Blue Nile still supplies the majority of volume reaching Egypt. At Aswan, the long-term average annual flow is about 84 billion cubic meters. Why the GERD changed everything. When Ethiopia broke ground in 2011, just a few miles from the Sudanese border, it was a bold move. A project that promised to deliver electricity to over 60 million people and finally harness the Blue Nile's massive hydropower potential. The dam's reservoir is enormous, large enough to hold nearly the entire annual flow of the Blue Nile. And that's where the conflict begins. Because filling means holding the water back, and when Ethiopia fills its reservoir, less water flows downstream into Sudan and Egypt. If that happens during a dry year, or worse, a multi-year drought, Egypt's entire water system could face crisis. Farmland could dry out, power generation at Aswan could stop, and millions could go thirsty. To Cairo, it's not just a dam, it's a lever, a switch, a threat. A battle over control. Egypt has reason to worry. For generations, it dominated the Nile through colonial-era treaties. A 1959 agreement struck with Sudan and rooted in British imperial control allocated 90% of the Nile's waters to just Egypt and Sudan. Ethiopia wasn't even at the table. That deal also gave Egypt veto powers over upstream projects. For decades, it worked. No country dared build without Cairo's blessing. Until Ethiopia did. And now, Egypt is demanding a new deal. One that guarantees water flow, especially during droughts. One that limits how fast the GERD can fill. One that gives Egypt a say in operations, despite the dam being entirely outside its borders. But Ethiopia continues to refuse. It never recognized the old treaties, and it insists the Nile belongs to all, not just the downstream. Meanwhile, Sudan is caught in the middle, both geographically and diplomatically. The GERD could bring big benefits to Sudan, steady flows that reduce flooding, cheaper electricity from power imports, and less sediment clogging irrigation systems. But the risks are real. If Ethiopia fills the reservoir without coordination, Sudan's own dams could be overwhelmed or undersupplied. And so, Sudan has shifted positions over the years, balancing technical advantages with political uncertainty. Sometimes siding with Egypt, sometimes with Ethiopia, always watching both sides closely. This is more than just water. At its core, this is a power struggle, but not just the political kind. Electricity is a major piece of the puzzle. Once fully online, the GERD could generate over 5,000 megawatts of hydropower, enough to power Ethiopia and export to neighbors like Kenya, Djibouti, and Sudan. In a region where energy demand is soaring and fossil fuel dependence is risky, this makes the GERD a cornerstone of Ethiopia's development strategy and a tool for regional influence. It's a river-turned power grid, and power, as always, is political. And then there's the future no one can fully predict. Climate change is making the Nile more volatile. Rainfall in the Ethiopian highlands is becoming harder to forecast, with longer droughts, fiercer floods, and more uncertainty for everyone downstream. The Nile Delta, Egypt's fertile breadbasket, is also in danger. As sea levels rise and less sediment flows downriver, salt water creeps in. Farms fail and cities can flood. Which means that in the years ahead, stable water flow will be more important than ever and harder than ever to guarantee. So what comes next? Talks have dragged on for years. The African Union has hosted multiple rounds, and so has the UN. So far, nothing binding has been signed. Egypt wants legal guarantees, fixed releases, drought-sharing rules, and real-time data. Ethiopia prefers coordination, cooperation, but not constraint. Sudan wants clarity and safety. Meanwhile, the dam keeps filling. By 2025, Ethiopia had completed most of the staged fills and activated key turbines. Its government declared the project a success. Egypt, meanwhile, continues to sound the alarm. Officials have warned that any unilateral action threatening Egypt's water security could cross a red line. The president, El-Sisi, has said that all options are open, and Egyptian military leaders have described the Nile as a matter of national survival. There have even been veiled threats of military force, and while direct conflict remains unlikely, the tension is real, heightened by failed negotiations, shifting alliances, and growing regional pressure. The question now isn't whether the dam will operate. It already is. The question is how it will operate during crisis, during drought, during the hardest years. Will there be rules, or will it be every nation for itself? Because if the Nile ever runs too low, the consequences won't be confined to a single border.